Hello, good evening everybody. Hi, welcome to CPR. Before we get started, if everyone can just come a little closer so we can just be a little more intimate, so people in the back fill up the front row.
Move your chairs up.
Yeah. Well, you're good. You're good right where you are. Yeah, if you guys want to come to the front and we'll just come a little bit closer.
Not damage our mark.
Yeah.
Let's do that. It's cute, but no.
Yes. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so my name is Remy Harris. I'm the programs manager here at CPR. And to kick off this wonderful event, I'm just going to do a land acknowledgement. Today we are on the land of the Lenape people, known as Lenape-Hoking. Specifically, we are on Canarsie land, a Brooklyn tribe of the Lenape people. I would like to take a moment to thank these hosts, acknowledging that we are currently on stolen territory. Upon the arrival of British colonial rule, the Lenape people were massacred. Those who remained were driven out west and their lands appropriated. In honoring the practices of Indigenous, Native, and First Nations people in Turtle Island, I also wish to pay my respects to the Lenape and Canarsie elders, past and present, for their leadership and presence in today's gathering. Like the rest of New York City, Brooklyn also relied on the labor of enslaved Africans for its past and present capital state. From 1783 to 1865, Brooklyn transformed from an agricultural slaveholding capital to the third largest city in the United States, fueled by the business of slavery. At the end of the Civil War, emancipation came without equality. Against this backdrop, Brooklyn's anti-slavery activists and radical abolitionists led the struggle for social and racial justice. Weeksville, Brooklyn, established in 1838, was one of New York's earliest and most successful Black communities intended as a political base. During the violent New York draft riots of 1863, Weeksville served as a refuge for many and mobilized a community around the pursuit of racial justice and equity. Please join me in taking a moment to recognize and reflect on the centuries of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that have led us being here together today. This is, of course, a very preliminary step in the movement for reparations in America. But I hope that you will join me in continuing to honor the truth in forthcoming events. Thank you. I'd like to welcome Charlotte Farrell to the stage.
Hi everyone. Just briefly, I wanted to really thank you, Remy, for that. That was wonderful. Really warmly welcome all of you to CPR, Centre for Performance Research. My name is Charlotte Farrell and I'm the Executive Director here. And I just wanted to say how thrilled we are to host this wonderful conversation this evening. We've been so excited and are just so grateful that you're all here sharing in this discussion tonight. I just wanted to share a bit about what CPR does for those of you who are not familiar. So we're a completely independent 501c3. We were co-founded by two choreographers, John Jaspers and Jonah Beaucaire, in 2007. And then in 2009, we opened our doors here. So for the past decade, we've been providing affordable space to dance and performance artists, as well as our own performance presentation programs and community engagement platforms. So be sure to join our mailing list before you leave. But I just wanted to also say that this event means a lot to us because DanceNYC are so supportive of the dance ecology more broadly, but more personally, they support us through the New York City Dance Rehearsal Space Subsidy Program made possible by the Andrew Mellon Foundation. And that allows us to provide 10 artists each year with 150 hours each at deeply subsidized rates. And it is just such a vital resource to dance artists. So thank you, DanceNYC. Thank you, Alejandra. So So we're thrilled to host DanceNYC. DanceNYC's Executive Director Alejandra Duque Cifuentes and Lisa Yancey for this discussion tonight, and thank you all for coming and enjoying.
Thank you all. So I'm actually going to start, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Candace, who's going to share a little bit more information on tonight.
Hi everyone. So, yes, thank you. My name is Candace Thompson-Zachary and I'm the Manager of Justice, Equity and Inclusion Initiatives at DanceNYC. So thanks again to CPR for hosting us, and I want to welcome everyone here and then everyone on the live stream, say hi. To our conversation tonight, the words we use to talk about thriving, right? So I'll give you a little brief thing. Where are we? In a cultural and workplace landscape that favors productivity over human value, what needs to happen for dance makers and cultural workers to develop practices that center personal and professional well-being? How can institutional structures adapt to ensure the resiliency and sustainability of the workforce? And this conversation aims to better understand the mindset and practice of thriving. So we're here also tonight, and we have to thank the Emmanuel Baptist Church Benevolent Fund, the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York State Council on the Arts, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and of course CPR, who's hosting us here. Few logistical things before we start. One, we are being photographed and videoed. So if you don't want to be on camera, let's sit on that side just so that we don't capture you. Second, of course, right, come center. And if you would like to help us extend the conversation past these walls, join us on Twitter at DanceNYC or on Instagram at dance.nyc. And the official hashtags are #DanceThrive, #townhall, or #the-words we use, right? And thirdly, look around just to see where the nearest exit is so that if we need to leave, you can do that. And I think on that note, I want to turn it over to Alejandra and to Lisa for this lovely conversation we're about to have.
Thank you. So, first, welcome. So glad to have you all here. My name is Alejandra Duque Cifuentes. I'm the Executive Director of DanceNYC. I'm going to do a little brief physical description for our low vision friends. So I am wearing a black long sleeve shirt, black jeans, black shoes, and probably also a black sole because black is my favorite color. I have my hair up. I'm a short Latina woman that is fair skinned.
Let's see, how do I describe myself? I'm caramel. I have a lot of spice and resilience in my hair. It's golden honey. It has this wavy texture because I plaited it up and took it loose, and that's what happens with my hair. So it is, I was having a conversation with a mentor, a really dear friend of mine I had dinner with 2 nights ago, Mickey Shepard, and I said that I like for my hair to be defiant. And so my hair feels defiant. I have on a blue, red, and mustard and black plaid dress. That is a winter dress. It's a winter dress that's designed by a German designer, and I just picked it up in Vancouver. So I get to wear my new dress. And I'm excited about this dress because the weight of the fabric is warm and cozy, and I get to be warm and cozy here with Alejandra. It has a cinched waist, pulled belt that's tied like a, what do you call those things, a tie? A tie? Yeah, but not quite the bow tie, but the traditional tie, hanging low, and it balloons out at the bottom on its own as if there's a crinoline or something underneath. And I have on red suede shoes and blue tights.
Very good description. So the words we use to talk about thriving. So this kind of set up for a conversation, the words we use to talk about any of the many things that we can talk about, was born out of a conversation that I was having with a dear mentor of mine, Baraka Saleh. But the phrase really came out of a different conversation that the members of our junior committee of the 2018-2019 Junior Committee developed for our symposium called The Words We Used to Talk About Race. And in conversation with Baraka, her and I were like, wow, we could really, there are many conversations that emerge out of that. And so this is the second conversation in that series, and it'll be an ongoing series to address all kinds of things. But really, it's meant to be almost like a window into an intimate discussion between friends. And so that's why it's set up in this way. And then at some point, that window turns direction towards you all. And so you will be chatting at some point as well as a part of tonight. So, you know, why thriving? Why, how are we going to spend our time together? So all of you, when you came in, there were some Post-its in your seats. And as we are having the conversation today, if you have a question or a thought, you can write it down, and the folks on our staff who can raise your hand, Candace or Eugene, will get it over to us. And we will both answer those questions and also post those questions back to you all so that we aren't really the only source of information in the room. So that's generally what the structure is, and we'll just do that the whole night. We also ask that once we're all in conversation, if it's your turn to speak, that you always use the microphone. Even if you have a theatrically trained voice, it is necessary to use the microphone to support our friends that are hearing impaired. And also to ensure that our friends on Facebook Live can hear us. So very important to use the mic. And when you use the mic, I always say hot dog, not water bottle, hot dog, so that we can hear you well. All right, so with that, you know, the first thing I want to say is any conversation about thriving is a conversation, I feel like we're really, it's a stream of a conversation, and we're entering into it at this particular juncture. It's a conversation that's been happening for centuries in our communities, and that will continue to happen. And so I wanted to name that, we're just kind of taking a look at it in this moment that we happen to intersect in. We didn't create it, and we won't be the last ones to have it. So I wanted to kind of center us in that first. The other thing that I wanted to say is this issue, or this question around thriving, what is it? Why does it matter? Why has it become somewhat of a buzzword right now in our community? At least for me and for the folks on the DanceNYC staff, is really emerged out of the conversations we've been having around what does justice look like? What does equality look like? What does it look like for us as workers, and what does it look like for a dance ecology in a larger sense? And so that word has manifested itself from conversations that started around developing our values of equity and inclusion as an organization, and figuring out, well, what does the practice of that look like? And for me, in a more personal way, it became front and center over the course of the past year when DanceNYC underwent its leadership transition that put me then into this position. And it had me really begin to evaluate, what does thriving mean in a nonprofit space that places such a heavy demand on the product of its people, but doesn't put the same kind of investment in their humanity. And that's been a question that's been sitting with me. And that question led me to, once the transition took place and I was appointed executive director, to say, man, I need help. And then enter Lisa. So, you know, I come from a tradition of I'm from South America, I'm from Colombia, and I come from a tradition of women and of people that do not work alone. That's just not how we do things. And so it's like, you call the friend, and you call the neighbor, and you call your aunt, and you call your grandma, and you call your sister, and you call your cousin, and everybody's involved in one way or another, and there's a level of interdependence, and sometimes I'll say codependence, but there's a level also of interdependence around how life is done. In part because of the economic structures there, where individualism isn't as prioritized as it is in the States, but also just simply because that's a reflection work together in a coaching relationship. And really that's when that that nugget of, well, what is Thrive? Like, how are you gonna do this? Came up. So that's how we all landed here, y'all. That's how we landed here. And I wanted to give you a little bit of that context, so you understood. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
You know, what's so interesting, earlier when I walked in, I see familiar faces, and familiar faces to me, they're like family. And I knew the moment that I met Alejandra that we were kindred. Just like Dominique, I was like, yeah, we're kindred. And one of the things that I appreciate about Alejandra leading into this conversation, saying that thriving isn't new, because we get stuck on what's the new, what's this innovation, what's this blah blah. It's not a new word, but it's also isn't a new practice. Right? Many of our existence today is evidence of thriving, is evidence of flourishing. And so I wanted to also add that the words certainly exist in many languages, but the practices also have existed. And we need to continue to acknowledge and lift up our practices that allow us to continue to exist in a way that keeps allowing for our realities to emerge and show up. So I wanted to say that. And I would also want to say, you know, this notion of thriving, when Alejandra and I started talking, and before, for me, this language became a language that began associated with my practice from a report that my colleagues and I did around thrivability, and working in partnership with New York Community Trust and Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, and really thinking about sustainability of Alana institutions. What does sustainability mean? And in our exploration, we took that another step and was like, I mean, are we really trying to come to solutions on just to sustain? If that's the North Star, when do we flourish? When do we flourish? And so thrivability became a nomenclature that we reclaimed, right? That we reclaimed as a part of setting some context in conversations about cultural practices and the actual doings and the potentials, the needs and innovations and technologies that our institutions, our people have always and continue to do, but often sometimes get left out of the context and the merit of what we've been doing to continue to exist.
Yeah. So I want to manage our expectations together, because we're going to start talking here.
Yeah.
We're going to, you know, we were just saying that we were missing the wine, really, is what's missing. But really the goal is to kind of tear the veil around how we, as individuals and our experiences as cultural workers, like how are we grappling with this question, and where is it unresolved for us? And that really we don't aim to give you a how-to or an action item for you to take home, but to rather pose many questions for you to consider. So this won't end with, here's what you should do, here are your top threes, here are none of that. We will simply kind of investigate our own process. But before we go straight into it, and I think you were in many ways alluding to that when we're talking about practices of thrivability existing for a long time, but our communities being left out of that. When we start these conversations, I always like to start by establishing a set of assumptions. So what are 2 to 3 things that we are not questioning the value of, or the reality of, or the definition of? And we set those as a stage so that you have context for where we started our conversation, and also where we'd like this conversation to go throughout the evening. So the first assumption that Lisa and I are starting from is that white supremacy is a thing, right? It's a thing and it exists, and this is how I've defined it through DanceNYC, and if you want to add or take away from that definition, I'm going to read it and then you can add or take away from it. But we use the definition from Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, which states, white supremacy is a descriptive term. It's a descriptive term and a useful term to capture the all-encompassing centrality and assumed superiority of people defined and perceived as white, and the practices based on this assumption. White supremacy in this context does not refer to individual white people and their individual intentions or actions, but to an overarching political, economic, and social system of domination. While hate groups that openly proclaim white superiority do exist, and this term refers to them also, the popular consciousness solely associates white supremacy with these radical groups. This reductive definition obscures the reality of the larger system at work and prevents us from addressing this system. Any additions to that?
No, I think that's a great definition. I appreciate Robin DiAngelo for that in White Fragility. I think I also just want to lift up, sometimes we are in our contemporary space and we're like, here, this was defined by this person. I mean, historically, just no Ella Baker, no James Baldwin, no Pauli Murray, no Audre Lorde. Right? Know that the definitions and contexts and stories, no Ibram X. Kendi, read the books that he's written, no Edward Baptiste, the untold, the truths that have never been told, right? Like, know that when we associate it with an individual, there isn't a one individual. They may have captured it in a way. Audre Lorde says that there's no new idea, there are only new feelings associated to those ideas. So yes to that, but recognize that historically, the realities and definitions and contexts and pains and struggles that went into being able to articulate these constructions and these constructs have existed for some time.
The second thing, as an extension of white supremacy, is that racism is a thing. That's the second assumption that we're working under. At DanceNYC, we use PSOC's analysis of what racism is, which is race, prejudice plus power. Anything to add there? And then lastly is that all of these things, white supremacy, racism, and capitalism, impact who gets to thrive and what is the definition of thriving that's being used at any given moment. And so recognizing how deeply connected those three things are in the context of our conversation. So with that, any other assumptions you think we should?
No, I think we just talk, and we create space and grace for us to unpack as we go.
Yeah. So thriving, So when I started at DanceNYC, I had been working as a freelance artist for many years prior to coming. I was a stage manager, I was a production manager, I was a teacher. I was doing whatever I could to make a living. And to somehow find a way to stay in the arts. And that's actually how I met some of the people in this room. And when I shifted into my work at DanceNYC, part of the reason why I made the decision to move into full-time, regular work was because I was brought up with the assumption that full-time salaried positions were positions that had a level of consistency, that had a level of security, that had a level of financial backing and support, that as a freelancer I maybe was not having. And I was working ridiculous hours and working all across the city, and it's a shame that in New York more people don't have cars, because when you have a car, I grew up in Miami, so when you had a car, you just threw like your whole life in your trunk, and you could just change your clothes or go to the gym or have groceries and all kinds of things back there, and you just made it work. Whereas in New York City, we kind of do the same thing, but we're bad people. which is carry a lot of bags up and down the subway. And so, you know, I moved into full-time work and previously when I started as programs manager with a little bit of an illusion of what awaited me, right? Oh, consistency. I knew I was going to the same place every day. I was going to be with the same people. I was going to have the same space. And at first it was 100% that, in the sense that I wasn't, you know, like lugging 12 sets of pastels to the school that I was teaching in Staten Island after taking 2 buses and a ferry, right? So I wasn't doing that. And so certainly, you know, my bag was lighter now. But what I started to realize was that in that structure of coming to the office and of working and of coming to the office, there was a sense of loss around the adaptability and the ability to kind of like change and shift and respond to intuition or the gut, and I found myself in a little bit of a train around, I need to make a structure and I have to make a protocol and I have to make a system and this has to be efficient and who's coming in next and what are we going to do now and how can we do it faster and better and what do we need. And don't get me wrong, I'm very type A and I really love spreadsheets and can't even lie. I really love spreadsheets and I really love it when things are geometric and symmetric and all of that jazz. But what was happening was that I found myself without working in a factory like I was, right? I found myself beginning to associate my success with how many emails I could send out in a given day, with how fast I could get through my to-do list. And that started to create a level of weariness in me. And it wasn't so bad at first, I would say, because my role within the organization was, you know, I wasn't leading a staff of people, you know, it wasn't like I was leading a bunch of people. I was still able to make adjustments around what I was doing and not doing. But when I shifted into the executive leadership role, it all changed. And it all changed because what I realized was that often whether it's an executive or artistic leadership in a very formal nonprofit setting, or when you're an artist leading your collective of friends that you're making this new thing that you're excited about, there is, it's like a pregnancy and a birthing process. Time and time again, you know, there's like this thing that you're making, and it's no longer just the checklist, but the checklists are suddenly connected to vision, to your ability to create, to transform culture, and then that extends into, am I good enough? Should I be doing this? Am I doing what I need to be doing in this? And it was that the kind of tediousness of that cycle being repetitive and not having an ability to break away, that I started to realize that thriving was not going to be possible under those conditions. And thriving for me in the sense of, what would it look like if the product of my work and the things that I was doing were not simply about finishing the checklist? What if it was about the thing that I actually couldn't imagine or write on a paper, the fruit, the product of something else, like the what's on the other side? And I couldn't see it. I couldn't figure it out. I was like, I don't know what it is anymore, because the only thing I can see are the 500 emails I got this weekend. And so that emerged this like question and discomfort in my body. I felt it in my body. You know, when I was working in theater, I used to install lighting. And so I would hold things over my head, and I would go up and down ladders, and I was on harnesses, and I was moving around. And I went from doing that 12 hours a day to sitting for 12 hours a day.
Yeah. You know, as you're talking, I want to start with it. I feel like thriving for me when I'm at the closest point where I overlay joy, love, and purpose. Like, I love what I'm doing. I feel that thing, and I feel connected to my purpose. And in my practice, the way that we describe thriving is when you have the resources, the space, and the agency to do your purpose in a way that you can produce the outputs and impacts that you desire, whatever that is. And I say have the resources, not have access to the resources. Because there's a difference in having the resources than this theoretical access to the resources, because sometimes there's a lot of gap in that. Then there's space. So this notion of space is physical space, it's emotional space, it's cognitive space, it's space, fatigue space, it's heart space, it's all of that space. You have to have space, even with, because you can have resources, but if you don't have space, it's a missing link. And then you have to have agency. You got to feel that you have the capacity, ability, rights to move without restriction, without the fear of impairment, without the fear of being impeded in any kind of oppressive, volatile, passive, aggressive, all of these ways, microaggressive ways. And so you do that to do your purpose. So whatever that is, if you're an organization, it could be your mission. If it's your life, it's that thing. And for me, purpose, I know I'm close. I can feel the closeness to purpose in my body. I used to be a dancer and choreographer, so I always feel it viscerally, and it hits in this gut part of me. I already know when I met Alejandro, I felt it in my body, right? Your breath starts becoming part of your indicator, not my head. And then we can do analysis, but the body is my first point of communicator that's letting me know I'm close to something energetically that's aligned with something that I may not even have the words for yet. And you get to do that to a way where you can produce whatever those outputs and impacts you desire. For some, those outputs can be product-based, it could be service-based. For some, it could be joy, it could be liberation, it could be a number of things, and those impacts. So that's what thriving is for me personally and in our practice, and we leave the space for every individual and organization to unpack, well, what do you mean by resources? So very often we think the first point of contact with resources is financial. God knows, Lord, if finance was the first point of contact in my life, I wouldn't be here. I just don't come from that kind of background. I'm the eldest of 7. I'm the only child and the eldest of 7. My mom comes from a family of 12. We're in the South, single parent. Like that notion of having all of these kinds of capital-based resources as the sole indicator of what's fueling possibility is a myth. It's a false assumption. It is not my personal reality, and it had not been the realities of many of the people with whom I grew up with. And so holding on to, well, what do we mean by resources? Our emotions are our resources. Our feelings are our resources. Our friends are our resources. I can't tell you how many times where I may not have had professional therapy, but I've had plenty of friends therapy. Plenty. Most people go to various religious institutions for that same exchange of finding space. So our resources may look differently, but we're often denied the credibility of those key things as viable tools of how we grow and exist and how we thrive, right? And so resources, space, agency, outputs, inputs. And as you were talking earlier, and I was like, yes. This when Alejandro talked, in my inside, I'm just like, yes. I'm just listening to you, girl. Tell your story, right? Tell that story. We have to all tell our stories. We all have to tell our stories because it gives us place. It allows us to stand firmly in our identity. And we cannot be in any place to do anything until we're standing in those spaces. So always tell your story, say your name, lead with that, tell that story, because there's a lot of resources that went into your ability to do that thing. So I'm feeling you as we think about and talk about this notion of the words that describe thriving. I would say for me, one of the things that I'm in a place where I can articulate it in this way now because of a practice, but it's been a whole bunch of unpacking, let me just say. And it's every day, and tomorrow I may describe it differently, so let me just tell you that too. Because it's constantly iterative. It is the dance for me. It is that thing. And I say that for me, I'm still one of those first generation. Here we are, 2019, and I can say I'm a first generation something. I want to be a first generation wealth builder in my family. And I'm very clear about the wealth part, where at the end of the day, when you subtract my liabilities against whatever I call as assets and all of the different words, that's not just financial, that I'm still net positive, that there's not a zero negative, that we are operating from a net zero, which on the financial side in this country, we're headed in that way. And so there are all these layers around why certain systems continue to enable the need and dependency for those who are able to financially build wealth. And wealth is able to compound, meaning it can actually get additional interest and earnings on that thing, which allows for future and generational yield. So thriving as a personal goal has connotations against the racial wealth divide. And so a lot of my practices around that. In addition to that, because I'm connecting to that intention, because Prosperity Now had forecast in their, I think, 2017, 2018 report that by 2053, we're moving towards, most Black will be negative zero net wealth, and that the racial wealth is continuing to divide. And the grade is 86%. The 86% of the top earners, 14% of the top earners own 86% of the wealth. And the top 10% of the wealth is more than the bottom half, and the top 1% own 32% of that. And it just keeps getting wider. And that's similar to like Holly's report when she was saying, yes, and even though we're doing all of this conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, keep it up. It's important. I don't want to dismiss its importance. But how is it translating to the change that we continue to need, to continue to lift up where 20 years from now, we're not having this conversation. And I appreciate us in December on a very interesting day. Very interesting day. At the end of a decade, we're here at the end of a decade, right? Entering, if a generation is 20 to 25 years, we're about to roll into 20. What does that mean as we start holding and lifting and demanding a different reality where the equity gaps aren't just theoretical conversations?
When you were talking and listening to you articulate your definition of thriving, it reminded me of our first conversation. So when you work with Lisa, in the first session, she sits down and she asks you like 10 questions. And with each one, it's like a dissection of a particular part of your life. And so if you didn't deal with it, that's when you were going to deal with it. And what's funny is that I was so, I come from an immigrant family. My mother used to clean houses, and I used to clean houses with her when we first moved to the States. And the city where I'm from in Colombia is a city of entrepreneurs. They'll sell you a dirty sock, you think you got a good deal. That's just what it is. And so there's this kind of dance in our bodies around, whatever, give me 3 things and I'll make a 5th, we'll figure it out. And there's this explosive creativity, right? And that creativity had been present in my life, and it had always been associated with my hands. This idea of being like a day laborer, like you're a good worker. And there was this pride around being a good and excellent worker and showing up and you will work the hours and you will do the thing and thriving was associated with how hard I was able to work. Like look at what I did, look at how busy my schedule was, or all the things I accomplished. And it was also in this context of the praise that would come from the power holder, right? So if the house was perfectly clean when the owner got there, then we did a good job. Like if it smelled of the laundry scent and the expensive candles and that the corners didn't have the grate that is developed when people live in a place, then we did a good job. And I think that I exercised that as a child, right? This notion of I'm like a workhorse that in my adult professional life meant Alejandra gets results. You want something done? Call her, right? And so thriving was my definition, what my body and my mind were doing, and what I thought I was doing as I was approaching my definition of thriving. It was this notion of that was connected to productivity. It was connected to how much I could approach whiteness and the wealth of whiteness, and the lie of leisure of wealth. Like, to experience thriving means that I could buy in excess. That was thriving. That I could buy something I didn't need. Or that I could, for the hell of it, go to the really expensive restaurant. Or that I could take the cabs to and from somewhere. I still feel guilty, y'all, when I get in a cab. It's wild. It's wild how there's like an immediate resistance to that. Or that is defined as a luxury. That's even more wild, right? And so when you started asking me all of these questions, and I had just started in this gig that I wasn't grouped into executive leadership. I worked my way in, it's like, I'm gonna build the door, I'm gonna close it, then open it, walk through. And you know what I'm saying, right? Like,
Forget your structure. I'm gonna build this door and I'm gonna walk through. You will not keep me out of here. I'm doing it.
And so, and now going to all these galas, you find folks bringing their children with them and teaching them, this is how you network. This is how you donate money. This is how you acquire money, blah, blah, blah. And to me, that was like, oh my God, when I was a kid, I wasn't doing that with my parents. And so when you started asking me all of these questions, I realized that the frustration that I was feeling was tied to how far away from actual thriving my embodied definition of thriving was. I was still, intellectually, I was like, no, thriving is this and this and that. But my body was like, I gotta work. I gotta show up 2 hours before the staff does, and I have to do the thing, and then I'm gonna stay 2 hours after the staff leaves, and then we're gonna get through it. I was somehow believing the lie that I would actually eventually complete the to-do list.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That I would make it to the end of it.
So what's your definition of thriving now?
So now, after some therapy and I don't think I have a definition, I think I have a feeling. The first first time that I felt like I was moving towards thriving was when I was able to say no.
Yes, 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 the power of no is its own thing. I mean, it is the privilege that you want to hold for yourself.
So that was the first time when I said no. And I don't even remember what I was saying no to. But I just remember being like, oh my God, I can separate myself from this. I can establish a line where I start and where that thing starts. So that's the first place where I approach thriving. But the thing that really did it, right? And the thing that I hope that I'm gonna be able to like articulate this correctly. And part of me, if I close my eyes the whole time, I'm finding the words for that because I might need to, but so one of the things that I realized that was happening in relation to my defining thriving as something that is somebody, first of all, it was defined in relation to somebody else. It was what somebody else was giving me permission to have or do or affording me or gifting me, right? So already, like, even though I was working a job and getting paid for it, like, I kind of felt like I had to earn it all the time, right? But what I realized was that I was keeping my promises to everyone but myself. And that was wild because I feel like the distortion around what thriving is and what success is, to me, is like, have any of you, you know grandmas that have like fruit bowls on their centerpieces in the center of their table, and it's like the fruit that you get at the dollar store? You know, the fake fruit? That's like perfectly cut. It's like, it looks so luscious, but you know it's fake. Like there's no substance, but it looks beautiful and it's perfect year round. That's what I think, that's what I had been doing and not realizing. That by meeting everyone else, by accomplishing what everyone else needed of me and keeping my promises to everyone else and being the person that got things done, the fruit of my labor was in many ways that plastic fruit. Because how could I say that I was giving people something that I couldn't even give myself? From where was it coming? Where was it coming from? Which is deeply connected to the debt-based society that we live in the States, in relation to capitalism, in relation to the lie of wealth and what wealth is and who actually has it.
Well, it's also deeply connected to us being socialized to be workers, right? Like, this isn't like a new, so this isn't an individual thing. This isn't a Alejandra is this way. This system has been designed for us to both be fear-based on multiple levels. Fear, retribution, fear, God, fear, as a tool to control. And this notion of reward and incentivizing for productivity is a historical practice that's been socialized primarily on Black and brown bodies. So that's not a mistake. And it's by design. It's like the fake fruit. That's the same fruit that's been on that same table for 15 years, but it never grew. It never, like, it's no nutrients. There's nothing in it but air, right? And then you're like, I'm in the matrix. As you were talking, it's making me think of two stories that I'd love to share with you. And then I guess we can also invite you to share and talk with us. So Black women have always been and consistently been, some in my family, some I met from school. I could just name them. Have always been my guiding lights. and moments when I dropped out of school, and moments when I ran away from home, and moments when I was like, I'm grown. And so there's we can really have some cocktails and conversation and we can talk about those. But there were two particular moments I'd like to share where I didn't know that it wasn't intentional language around thriving, but I started feeling like I was stepping into my agency. One particular moment was, I went to law school, I remember the New York bar, and I went to law school only because undergrad had ended. and I was like, I'm supposed to know what I'm going to do. I need a little bit more time. So law school, honestly, was to buy me time. I was dancing, I'm from Atlanta, and I was leaving Atlanta and ended up going to Boston. And I was in law school and I did that and ended up writing on the Environmental Law Journal. And the only reason why, I was like, environmental law, why is that, how is that relevant to my life? And then I learned about the asthma that I used to have as a child and the asbestos and the social injustices. So environmental law from a social justice platform felt relevant to me. Went through that, got through the end of the third year, and I was sitting, and you've done all of your due diligence, because you know you're going to do your interviews, and I was still dancing. I'm telling you, law school really was the backdrop. I choreographed my first video as a first-year law student, and I was so glad that my constitutional law professor let me fax in my exam from LA. Like, it was the backdrop. I auditioned for The Lion King, not really thinking that they would call me back, but just because I was in school and I hadn't danced in a while, and I didn't even tell anybody because I didn't really think that they were going to call me back. And I just wanted to make sure I was still competitive because dance was real for me, and law school was the thing to buy time. And so that had been my practice, and they did call back, but I was in my 2L. That's another story, cocktails and conversations. But then there came to this moment where I was sitting in my third year and interviewing possibly to go, because you hear you're supposed to do these things. You got to go to become a firm. What are you going to do with these loans? What are you going to do with this? And so I was doing this, but my body stepped outside of this cavity. My spirit stepped outside of this cavity and was like, what you doing, girl? Like, literally, I'm just as you are sitting here and I can see you, I saw myself saying, why are you still trying to prove yourself? Why are you still trying to prove yourself to this man? This white man who had on a blue socks, brown shoes, black suit. I'll never forget it, white shirt. And I remember thinking, you don't want to be him. And he will never see you. He doesn't see your dance. He doesn't see your entrepreneurship. All he sees are these things that you're checking off as a part of a first-year associate. You don't want to be that. And I had like 5 more interviews set up, and I called my mother. And I said, I'm not doing it. And she's like, what? And I was like, I went to that interview, and I was like, I can't do that. I can't do this, can't do that thing. And she said, well, I didn't think you were anyway. But you have to punctuate. And for her, punctuate, like put a period on that. It mean you need to pass the bar. So there's always is on your terms. You punctuate and you pass the bar. And that was a first walk away moment, because then I didn't call and cancel. I needed to do something that felt to me like there was no coming back. And not showing up for me felt like there was no coming back, right? So I just didn't show up, I didn't do anything, and I paid for it and did what I did and passed the bar. So that was one moment that began to seed me. Another moment happened in 2013 leading to 2014. I was getting prepared to enter into my 40th season. And I was just sharing this story with this person who is a friend of mine now. And we were in New Orleans as a program officer at a foundation. I won't say which one, but we were down there on some work stuff. And I had decided, some things had happened in my life. A partner that I thought I was going to be with, like forever, ended. Change was happening, right? Then around a 7 and 8 year period. And I was like, I need to go away. And I didn't want to enter this next decade, I didn't want to just roll into it. I wanted to put some intentionality around what's my wealth building strategy. And so the first thing I decided was, I'm going to do it. Like, I'm going to go away for 6 months. And my parameters were 6 months, French-speaking country, not a cosmopolitan city, because I could not be distracted by the shopping, not right on the beach, because I didn't want to sleep it away and lounge it away and tan, but somewhere where I wanted to feel more like a different kind of other. and where I had to struggle with language and communication, where I had to relive those kind of things in a different country. And I ended up, two people, given those parameters, two people said Aix-en-Provence. I knew I loved the south of France. James Baldwin was in the south of France in St. Paul de Vence. And so, sight unseen, I put a deposit down for 3 months on Airbnb place in Aix-en-Provence. Back to the New Orleans trip, and I was with this person. We come from a meeting. It was a moving meeting. And she said, we were on the rooftop, and she said to me, and I was like, I'm going away for 6 months. And she asked me, what if you lose all your clients? Like, what if you come back and no one wants to hire you anymore? And I started my consulting practice in 2002, so here we are in 2013. And I hadn't even thought about that question. I hadn't even thought about it. Like, it hadn't even crossed my mind that I was going to come back and not have clients. And I thought about it, and I said to her, and the most honest, because I hadn't thought about it, was the honest answer. I was like, you know what? If I could become irrelevant in 6 months, I need to bust this bubble. Because I give so much of who I am to this thing, and I've been doing it for 12 years. So if I'm still looking for some outside thing to define my possibilities, something's wrong. I'm not thriving. I'm not doing anything. And I went. And it was great. And it was the best decision I made in my adult life, and I came out with some strategies. But the takeaway, I centered myself. And I learned that's kind of when I started really learning how, and there was no, let me just also be clear, it wasn't like there was a trust fund. There was no trust fund. There was no set money that I'd saved up. There was nothing that would have been like some outside indicator that's like, all right, you set, now go. Where the you set, now go is always internal. You decide and the universe will conspire with you. But you have to hold it and then say it out loud to others, because then they become your accountability partner. And they become your reverb of that intention. See, thriving is energetic too. And we have to hold our power in that way to yield and manifest the outcomes that we seek.
Wow.
And that feeling that you're describing, I felt it in my kitchen at the end of October of this year, when I had noticed and realized that I don't keep any promises to myself. I show up for everybody except for me. And so, like a good IG generation person, I had found this account of this psychologist on Instagram, and she has this whole thing called the Future Self Journal. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna do this thing. I've always loved journaling, and that was my thing. And the premise was very simple. 10 minutes a day, the beginning of the day, and you answered 6 questions. What's your daily affirmation? What is the one thing you're going to focus on changing? 1. What are 3 things you're grateful for? What 3 characteristics will your future self have? What will you feel more as a result? And what could you do today that looks like that future you? And so the only thing that I promised to myself that I would do for 30 days was to do this damn journal. That's it. I was like, I gotta start somewhere. I did day 11. And then something came up. I woke up late one day, and I used to show up to the office, and that was the first thing I did in the office. But then I missed a train one day, and so I was late, and then I got there just in time for the meeting, and and then it was a week and a half, and I didn't do it, and then I did it another day, and then in day 20, I was like, and I was not going to finish it. And a week, 2 weeks went by, and I was like, whatever, I'll just start again. I'll just start it again later. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm doing the thing. I'm doing the thing.
Prioritizing yourself.
I'm doing the thing. I can't even keep a promise to myself to write for 10 minutes. I couldn't keep a promise. And so it was like, I would have finished it like 2 weeks ago. That's how long I stopped doing it. And I decided to keep doing it even if it was like, I was like kind of like taking it back on like on day 20th or something. And when I got to day 30, what I heard, the same way that you heard yourself speak, what I heard myself say was, you can trust yourself. And that was the first time I felt thriving. Was when I started to do first for myself before I did for others. Which totally flipped the script around what was valuable, what meant, what was productive, what was valuable, what mattered, who I had to give my time and attention to.
Yeah, because you set the filters.
That's it. And so what to me was wild about that was that I had, when I started as executive director, I had to, do a whole presentation on like, this is my vision for the organization and what I think we should do, blah, 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 right? And one of the things that I said to the board was, I want to move into a space where dance and the people that make dance can thrive. This is what I told the board, right? This was like March. And I had been saying this out loud to the staff. I was like, I feel like, we need to start internally before we go externally. And, and I had learned this at church, right? Like, you gotta be integral, the same material inside and out. You gotta be the same material inside and out. And I had been noticing and feeling and having worked in the organization pretty much in every role that ever existed there, I was like, damn, like, externally, everybody loves what we do. People are like, oh my God, this is great. But internally, we're all like, are you tired? I'm tired. You tired? Did you sleep? I didn't sleep. Did you sleep? And like, I was like, there's a disconnect between that, and why is there like a bridge and we get to be stuck under the bridge? And so I had been telling the staff, I was like, we gotta start internally. And it wasn't until I did that I understood what that idea that lived in my mind, that like theoretical, cerebral idea, what it actually meant in my body. And so it was then that it became really clear to me, and I told you this before we started, I was like, I want to make sure that I say this because while I'd love this to be an open therapy session, it's not. What understanding what thriving meant for me actually shifted how I believe that we needed to start working as an organization. If we really had these values, if we really held this, then it meant that something had to change. And that what had to change was that if our staff were not the first beneficiaries of the work that we were doing, then we might as well close up shop.
Absolutely. I mean, if we don't center the people, nothing else matters. Period. Full stop. It's in my practice as well. I mean, the edification of my colleagues is the most important thing. If they don't feel the joy and love and purpose, that they're fulfilling their purpose in the work, then my job is to support them getting to that thing, whether it's with me or not. Right? Like, it's always about that, because then that our ecosystem, because then we get to build ecosystems of like, oh, that's the centered value. We move from there. Mm-hmm. We live from there. We operate. We're like, oh, come on, girl. Don't worry about that, because all that stuff's constructed anyway. It is an illusion. We are Octavia Butlering this. We will create the reality that we want. It is the parable that we design. Once you know that that isn't within your power, then you just let go of all those constructions as if they define you, because they do not. And then you be like, oh, but here's my homie too, who believe that. And we can build a tribe, and then the tribe can have reverb, and it becomes exponential. It's always the one-to-one-to-one where the exponential happens, right? It's that build. So, yes to that.
I have not found the structured solution of what that looks like. I don't know, y'all. And the staff here knows too. It's like every week we're like, what are we doing? How do we do it? But that was, I think, the shift, right? The shift was, okay, I'm recognizing that white supremacy tells me the to-do list, perfection, fast, everything's urgent. I have to do it better than, like I have to compare. There has to be a comparative analysis between my work and someone else's. Just borrow the money, pay it back later. Just borrow the time, pay it back later. Just borrow the labor, pay it back later. You can sleep when you die. And, right? And
You know what's funny about that? Tracy Ellis Ross did this thing. She was like, she says, sleep when you die. She's like, no, sleep when you're tired. That's when you should sleep. Yeah. Because you will be dying faster if you don't sleep when you're tired.
yeah.
We have to decolonize all of these constructs. I think that one of the biggest things is that we have to interrogate everything because we've been miseducated.
And here's the thing, what's crazy about dance is because it's a work of the body, what's wild to me, right, is that of all the disciplines, dance is the one that gets least funding. And to me, that's not accidental. Because when you look at visual arts, there's a physical product. I own it, I'm gonna put it in my house, and I'm gonna be of society. But when you're working with dance, you're literally talking about the body, a human being that you're either valuing or devaluing in the practice, in how much you're paying them, in how often they have to work, when they have to work, do they have access to healthcare, and so to me, like the second I started, I was like, oh my God, my stomach hurts because I have not eaten. I'm sitting in front of my computer, my stomach hurts, and it's telling me that I'm hungry and I'm not eating. And I've trained myself to ignore my body telling me what it needs. And dancers do that, right? And choreographers do that. And I think about how wild would it be? Like, what like what's the word? Cataclysmic. What cataclysmic movement would we begin if we dare to value the dancer? Because the second that we start to value the dancer, we're valuing the human. Because the work of dance can't happen without the human body, without the person. And so what would happen? What would happen if all of a sudden we're valuing the labor, the dignified labor of the body and of the person?
You know, so I noted that I used to be a dancer and choreographer, and I believe that I was a dancer before I was born. My spirit's a dancer. But I think that my entrepreneurship comes from dance. My creativity of anything, of how it manifests in the world, comes from dance. And I tell people all the time that I got through law school because of the discipline of dance. It's the only way. It was the only way that you can consume that much information and interrogate it and embody it. That was transferable skills from dance, full stop. If you want to go to law school, be a dancer. Because the discipline that came, and it makes me then rethink, again, let's interrogate everything. The output products of that kind of processes are licensable. It is an asset, it's an intellectual property. How can we rethink where our practice can hold various different understandings of the assets that they yield? I remember in college doing God's Trombone, which was a very specialized licensed dance. Our dance department licensed it. And I did, let's go down Moses or some, one of them, one of the spirituals. And you had to hold your hand. You couldn't just do it. There was a very specialized way that we had to do it, and someone had to come in and watch us do it in order to perform it. That's a product. It was in the body, but they paid for that. And I think we have to, I believe we have to rethink too, not, or maybe reimagine. It's a it's not a create. It's a because it exists. The understanding of how all of this translation into what we could use buzzwords like innovation, what we use words like entrepreneurship. I absolutely know that my entrepreneurship and the things that I'm producing and the way that my iterative mind works comes from dance, comes from that space of sight to translation, from body to translation, from communication beyond the voice in that kind of understanding energetically in the space, and knowing that it's not just the body of, the extent of these phalanges, but the beyond that space. If we know that, then we're touching people every time we move, and if we're touching people every time we move, we are catalyzing something. And so that's an asset that when we know that, that's power, right? That's energy is neither created nor destroyed accordingly. So that's power. And so how do we hold that and lean into that?
Has anybody written anything on their Post-its? Yes? I would like to know what those are, if that's okay. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Let's see what this says. Can you share more resources for learning more about the history of fear as a socialization societal tool? Organizations, people, artists, etc.
I think we all should answer that. I'll start with one. I recommend, what's the rule? This isn't, a recommendation is not an action. I want to make sure I'm working within the construct.
No, you can answer.
Okay.
And if other folks have tools as well, we can hear them.
I recommend My Grandmother's Hands by Resma, I want to say it's McKinnon, but it's Resma. It's racialized trauma in the body, and highly recommend. You can even find different YouTube clips of him speaking, but I do recommend reading the book because it talks about the internalization of that fear and how, and he talks about it with various different communities, primarily based in the United States, but seeing how it translates across the globe and where the traumas that we carry in our DNA is also impacting how we determine whether we have fight, flight kind of response. And I think that notion, so that's one resource around fear. And I think also moving, the first time I interrogated God was a big deal for me as a Southern Baptist, raising, Sunday school going, Wednesday, Sunday night, church going, Easter person. When some of those fundamental, when my inquiry was causing conflict and my desire to be like, I want to understand, but I can't ignore this thing. Help me understand. It was just like, oh, then you don't have faith. I was like, but I do. My whole life's on faith, but I don't understand this thing. That was my moment for me to start unpacking fear. I was also, trust yourself too. Like there's resources, but there are things in your body that you probably can look to that you may have been afraid to say. You can quietly begin to ask, like, why? What's the worst thing that could happen in that? And is that still real for me, or am I holding that because someone told me that thing? What would you say?
The resource that I have is not about societal fear or necessarily like a macro analysis, but this tool that I mentioned that I use, this particular IG, and this psychologist does everything in IG. They're not like, anyway, so It's called The Holistic Psychologist, and they address fear a lot. They address the neurological function that it has and the ancestral connection that it has, and give you tools for how to interrupt the patterns of fear and how they manifest in your body and therefore in the outcomes of your practices in your life, whether that's an artistic practice or just like how you are taking up and walking through space, or moving through space rather. And so I actually really recommend it. Some of the things that I find there consistently challenge a lot of these notions around what is thriving, what's not thriving. As you were speaking, I was thinking about thriving as the difference between eating when I'm hungry and enjoying my food. And I think that I've enjoyed my food before in the relation to comfort, when comfort food was the response to an avoidance of or processing of trauma, fear, insecurity, frustration, overwhelm. And so that's how I developed, oh, well, this is my comfort food. Oh, I love this comfort food. But it was really more about self-soothing than it was about actually enjoying the ingredients or the food that I was eating. And that has been an interesting shift to move into. And food is just the analogy in this case. But like what happens when my life isn't a reflection of what it has to be just to stay alive, but rather when I can be in relationship with what's around me, the air, the sun, nature, the people around me, the comforter that I'm sleeping under, just being like this relationship with full presence. Like what does it mean to be fully present and in full awareness of my physical, spiritual, and mental and emotional self.
I mean, you're thriving when you don't even think about it. Like, you don't even have to think about it. It's not a constant thing that you have to interrogate. It's like, I don't think about blinking. I don't think about breathing. And when you talked about food, because I come from big families, so when scarcity isn't something that's in your forefront, subconscious, it just doesn't exist because you don't even have to question whether it's going to be there. I mean, imagine if you never had to think about money. What could you do? Or you never had to think about the being loved, or being valued, or being seen, or having an idea that you want to pursue, and it's that thing. And you don't have to think about the no. Like you just move from a place of, I'm just gonna try that. You just do. You know, it's not even, you don't even have to analyze it.
What would your dance making look like?
Well, one, I'd still be dancing.
Right? But like what would I make? And don't get me wrong, because I think that there's like an ignition, like a trigger that happens when you're working within restraint. But I think it's very different to work within chosen restraints.
Yeah.
I'm going to develop this practice and I'm only going to use these 4 tools or these 4 movements or these 3 moments or I want to interrogate.
But you created that impediment. It wasn't created for you.
Exactly. Whereas like what would happen to, do you imagine what would happen to what dance makers could do in New York City or create if they weren't like, what space am I going to use? Like, do I have to go to work for 8 hours before I rehearse? Like, what would happen? What would happen? And that question of what would happen, like what is the environment that would need to be created in order for that question to not have to be asked, is what led me to this moment.
And those are, I know organizations that are holding that question, right? I get the pleasure, the joy of working with organizations, specifically for working with artists and rethinking. That's why rethinking this stuff. We got to, this thing that's constructed, we already know what it will yield because we live it every day. So if we want change, we got to do something different. And I know that there are organizations out there, a number of them, the field certainly being one, but a number of them, Creative Capital, a number of them probably all over the country, I don't even want to start naming, to the exclusion, who is doing the work where their mission is creating a space where we are not even just deconstructing, we're just like constructing from the place of where our values live, towards the vision that we hold, and not trying to piecemeal and shave a little here and modify here. It was never designed for you to thrive, so even if you take off a little bit here and shift it here and put it over here in this light, it still won't grow for you to thrive. It's the same thing. You need different kind of base, nutrients, ingredients, it's values based.
You remind me of a saying my mom used to say, I'm going to say it in Spanish, aunque el mono se vista de seda, mono se queda. Which means, even if a monkey wears silk, still gonna be a monkey. Still a monkey in silk.
Yeah.
So I don't have an answer to what institutions should do to thrive. Because I don't think the institutional structure was made for that purpose, if we understand the history of the nonprofit complex. But I am in the outrageous experiment of trying. I want to make DanceNYC a place that is so cool to work with that we have to turn people away. You know what I mean? That it's like, oh my God, I wish I had more positions.
Totally.
Because I think that when I'm full, I can pour out. And I think it was you who said this to me. It probably was you. You said to me, as you heal, your institution will heal.
I mean, I think that the question of how institutions thrive is that institutions have to define what thriving is. Like, you can't create something that you can't see. Vision starts in the mind first, then in the world.
And that institutions also have generational trauma that has to
Absolutely.
be healed.
Absolutely.
And that has to be unearthed, and that has to be addressed.
Absolutely.
You can't just like fire the staff and bring new people, because that trauma still lives in that place.
You can't have the agency part that I talked about if you don't have the wellness. It doesn't, you can't be healthy and thriving and sick. Those things can't coexist. It can be mass, you can be like abused and put on some makeup, but you're still abused.
And that's the thing that's interesting, is that in institutional structures, right, we model capitalistic practices of removing the humanity and having transactional relationships, right? It's like, this is the HR handbook, and you gotta do this, and I gotta do this, and don't get me wrong, I am huge with labor rights and establishing standards that safeguard the people doing work. But what I'm referring to more specifically is that kind of separation between the person and the work. Like, this is just business, it's not personal, this is just business. That separation of like, well, this is it's one extreme or the other. Like, my job is my only way of obtaining a sense of self and wholeness, or the other extreme that it's like, my job and my life, and I, the person, do not live in relationship with my job and the people that I'm with. And I think that those extremes come from the same, they're different side of the same coin. Because if as leaders, the first work, the first creative practice work is ourselves, what would the spaces that we work in and live in look like?
You know, nonprofit still centers profit. I mean, the word is still profit. The non is not, it's not even an E on it. It's not even a real word. It's like, it's the prefix. So profit still is at the center, even in nonprofit. And everything else builds from there, right? So we are, again, trying to operate within, with ideologies that center that thing. And if we don't retranslate what is the translation of that centered word that has the prefix that's like, it's not for this, but it never says what it is for.
Yeah.
And so you're supposed to be left to move from that kind of space. And to your point of centering the person, I think that if we don't know what we're for, it's hard to center anything. And we work from our space of our mission, right? Our mission is designed to do this. This is our purpose. So you don't say I'm a not-for-profit. I am what my mission is. Like the I am. And again, it's also in the negative. Like we learned earlier, you don't write from the negative. Don't talk from the place of what you're not. Speak from the affirmative of who you are, and lead from the affirmative of who you are. That'll allow us to find the values that align the people who are supposed to be the magnets, who will thrive too with you in that space, to see it and connect. And you're building from that space. But I find one of the biggest structural problems with nonprofit is that we still center profit and we speak in the negative of what we're not for. And then ask for that translation to show up for, and then ask for the people to lead in that space, and every other structure is still coming from the profit space. That's why it works in commercial spaces, because they're clear what they're for. And I want to be clear too, there are for-profit entities that are great places to work. It's not an automatic that it's a bad place to work because profitability is an intentional aim. Being able to resource and employ and labor, those are all great things as long as it's not at the expense of these other bodies. So I think that we can learn something from each other, but I think, again, interrogate everything, because we got to deconstruct and eliminate key things and say, not-for-profit still centers profit. It's a preposition, and then the core thing that is always for, and we're scrambling around trying to figure out how to retranslate that into impact and service-based work. And that's problematic.
And what's interesting about saying we separate the person from the work, or this is business, not personal, is that, I keep thinking about the way in which we then reproduce those patterns of harm, right? Like, if I am really bad at forgiveness in my relationship with my husband, how the hell am I going to do it with my staff? And I'm saying my husband because in my particular life, that's the person that's closest to me, the closest relationship I have. If I can't exercise these parts of my life as a human being in my personal life, that does not change when I walk through the doors of my organization or the rehearsal room. I don't suddenly become a great leader. I don't suddenly become a good boundary setter or any of the things. And to me, I think that's what we've lost when we've been this is work-life balance, or this is like work, and this is, and again, not to say that people's lives are their work, but rather to name that we are the common denominator in those spaces. And we like to professionalize our skills, and we like to also capitalize from our own trauma and the like pushing and the kind of like I think they call it trauma porn, you know, when you're like, yes, I am the first generation college student in my family. Yes, you should feel very proud. You know what I mean? Like when that's where we're finding our sense of purpose. And we bring that into the spaces. We bring that into our work. And with artistry, right, the thing that's beautiful about making art is that we get to interrogate and ask these questions about our humanity, and we like put it on the stage, and the things that are painful and the things that are beautiful and the things that are unanswered questions, right? But in the office setting, we actually just reproduce that with each other.
Yeah, I'm curious how others who are here today, how does thriving, this concept, show up in your lives? Like, I mean, it's cold as my mom would say, snot. It's cold as snot outside, and you all came in today. It is brick. What is thriving? Like, what about this conversation is relevant for you? Anyone want to share that?
I mean, just listening to just listening to the two of you speak about opening these spaces up in our minds makes me feel like there is more possibilities to thrive. And I must admit, I don't think about it as much as maybe I should. I'm, involved in the day-to-day work of making sure the organization is grounded and moving. But as you ask the question, I think about the vibration of art that emulates from the space that we're at and that we're building and that we're keeping clean. The space that we're working so hard at doing and forgetting about how much fun it is, or how we're feeling the audience's responses and the relationship between the audience and the performance that's going on stage, and how important that is to us to make sure that there's a reflection going on there and there's a great talk back happening while the performance is going on and after it's going on. There is a sense of thriving inside of that.
Anyone else want to share?
First of all, thank you so much for having this conversation. So this year has been a year of interrogation and deconstruction on very much a personal level. And the seeds that have been planted throughout that have started to root into the professional space. And so there's been growth in areas that I wasn't even thinking about prior to this work. And so some of the work that I'm doing, is focused on wellness, is focused on meeting needs, is focused on, okay, if we're going to talk about wellness, we have to talk about, this is coming straight from Brene Brown, we have to talk about the things that get in the way of wellness, if we're going to talk about that. And so I didn't expect, I saw that I've been to the words we used to talk about, race, actually, the one it gave me. And words are really important to me. I'm a linguist, and words are one of the ways that I receive love. They're very central to kind of my work as I learn more about myself. And so I wanted to come to this because it's like, okay, wellness and thriving, similar. But I didn't expect that it was going to be so many themes in the stories that you shared aligned with my own journey and my own truths that I found this year in terms of looking at fear and looking at miseducation and listening to the body, because the body knows first and it will always know first. And thinking about our own individual histories in the larger context of cultural histories and what that means for our future moving forward. and the ways in which we do have agency when we start making choices, maybe across barriers constructed by fear, and starting to see the empowerment that comes out of that, you know? So I came, I think, from a professional place, like a professional interest, and then it turned into just a reaffirmation of kind of the mess and the beauty and the growth and of the humanity that I've been moving through. So thank you.
Anyone else want to speak? Reality is we aren't compartmentalized. That's another construction that we've been told that we have to hold this part, and this part, and this part, as if those lines, as if it's not one body that has desires, that has needs, that wants to give and produce and in all kinds of manifestations. And that's another construction that we can say no to. That we can say no. I say no to that as my truth. Just because the masses hold it, you can say, I say no to that as my truth. That is not my truth. So your professional, personal, sister, friend, self, that's one self. And we get to hold those intersections in ourselves, but we try to compress and move them as if they, I don't know, as if they are on demand. But we are all of it. We are everything. We are every woman, or every man, or every gender, or every whatever, however we identify every person. Thank you.
Thank you. Your organization will heal at the rate that you heal. Your work will heal at the rate that you heal. Thank you, everyone.
So yeah, let's just give a round of applause, a deep sigh, an exhale, everything that was just shared today. Yes, exactly, a hand toss. Yeah, thank you so much for that honest conversation, that generous conversation. I mean, yeah, I can just feel the energy shifting in the room, and I'm sure our folks at home and on the train got a lot out of it as well. I just want to share a few things before we leave. One is that DanceNYC has a survey for dance makers who have budgets between $25,000 and $1 million. Yes, so if you or anybody you know qualifies, please let them fill out the survey. It's on our website, dance.nyc. We also have our annual amazing symposium coming up in March 20th and 21st. On the website, dance.nyc/simp. You can register there and find out more about who's curating and all sorts of other things that's coming up soon. And we're partnering with Camellia Brown's The Gathering on January 12th at 280 Broadway at Gibney. So again, check out Gibney's website. I think information is there.